Hi, Renee. How are you?
I'm very well, Oslam. It's lovely to be in talking to you today.
We want to welcome you to 10th International Bodrum Jazz Festival. I wish you could be here in person, and but I hope we will do it next year together again. I'm very glad that you are here. Just it's been like 10 years that we have met, or nine.
We met, maybe a little less than 10 years ago in New York because of Fahir Attakoglu, who I knew, and of course you know him very well. During COVID, I was able to put together, I think it was something like seven jazz musicians who sent you recorded performances for the Ankara Festival,
Yeah, for the
so that
20,
we
25th version of Ankara Jazz Festival, yes.
exactly, including the lecture that Richard Barada did
Mhm.
about jazz and music. So we did that, and then I was also able. I put you together with Dimitri Vasilikis, who created the jazz festival in Rhodes, and then you started exchanging with Turkish musicians playing in his festival, and then Dimitri coming and playing in Bodrum.
Yeah.
So I think it's been a very interesting exchange. And of course, just I got what, 2 months ago, you are now, Bodrum is now a sister festival with the Sicilian Jazz Festival. And of course, I introduced you to Fabio Lanino, who's one of the directors. And now you're part of the internet, oh, what is it? The
World,
Internet Jazz Network.
yeah, very proud
So
of
I
it.
think that, yeah, I think that that's really exciting. And because you've been able to really put Turkey on the map in terms of jazz between the Ankara Festival and the Bodrum Festival. So I think only good things can happen with this kind of networking because it will help to bring more international musicians to your festivals and for you to send Turkish musicians throughout Europe and other places. So I think all of that is really positive as we with and being really a rather universal music for people. Because what is astounding to me many times is to see musicians who don't speak the same language, but who then can start playing together. It's really quite wonderful
So
to see that
amazing,
happen.
amazing. It's amazing. Yeah, so
Yeah.
this year, 10th Bodrum Jazz Festival, and it will be the 30th of Ankara Jazz Festival. So
Yes,
in
right.
both festivals, we decided to go with the theme Jazz is Universal. So what we are trying to do is with the World Jazz Network, of course, with the Sicily, with Rhodes, and with your support and everything. So I think it will be very good for all of us to connect each other through jazz.
I
Uh,
agree.
Starting from this year and growing from there. So, the musicians always are very fond to be a part of the festival. So it's a good place for them to be.
I
They are happy
I
in the
agree.
festivals.
I
So
agree.
Jazz is Universal is very good fit for us for this year, I guess. And we really wanted you to be here to talk about, Ertegün Brothers, Atlantic Records, Arif Mardin, and your connection with them. So, I before that, I just want you to explain us how did you, come into music business?
Well, it's kind of a funny story, but my sister and I were living in at the beach in Southern California in Huntington Beach, and because we were working for a doctor after school who was a big folk music fan, he ended up buying this club called the Golden Bear. And then he brought in two partners who were two Greek brothers called George and Ted Nikas. And it was an incredible club because it had all genres of music, jazz artists like Charles Lloyd, people like Buffy St. Marie, and then a lot of artists who were just starting out who became very famous, like Janis Joplin and Big Brother and the Holding Company and the Byrds, and just it was an amazing place. So then my sister and I decided we would move to Los Angeles and really get jobs in the music business. And my sister got a job at Sunset Sound Recording Studios, and then I became an agent at that time, it was called the Ashley Famous Agency. And then it became International Famous. And we had artists like The Doors and Alice Cooper and Joni Mitchell. And it was a very interesting thing. And then the Beach Boys, who I knew, asked me if I would come and run their personal appearance department. So I
Wow.
coordinated with their agents and I worked for them. And then David Geffen, who I knew from my days at the agency, started a record company called Asylum Records. And that record company had the Eagles and Linda Ronstadt and Jackson Brown and a number of artists, and also the management company. So that's how I got involved in the music business. And then I had met Jerry Wexler when I was working for the Beach Boys. Okay, so I married Jerry Wexler, who was one of the owners of Atlantic Records, and moved to New York. And I really wasn't working in the music business, but involved certainly around it. So my sister then joined John Reed, who was Elton John's manager in John Reed's management company. They also represented Queen and several other artists, Billy Connolly, who was a Scottish comedian. Elton and John Reed started Rocket Records, and my sister was vice president of Rocket. And they had Neil Sedaka and had a lot of hits with him. And then when John Reed and Elton parted company, both professionally and personally, then Elton asked my sister to form a company called Constant Communications. And so she handled all of Elton's touring in the United States for over 30 years.
Wow.
And then my sister's husband is Chris Hillman, who's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, who was one of the founding members of the Byrds and the Flying Burrito Brothers and a number of other very interesting bands. And so I suppose we're a music family on all levels. And there we are. I'm not a historian of Atlantic Records, but obviously I do know some of the main things. But I think it would be interesting, especially for your audience, to know a little bit about the background of Ahmet and Nesli Ertegün
Yeah.
before they became owners of Atlantic Records.
Yeah.
First of all, they were big
One moment,
fans.
one moment. I just wanted to say to the Turkish audience that,
Okay,
you know,
okay.
Ertegün family is very important for us, not only because of they have been in jazz and pop music, but they also used to come to Turkey every summer, especially to Bodrum, because they own a house in Bodrum. He was like attraction point, inviting everybody, well-known artists who would never maybe come to Bodrum if it wasn't Ertegün's. So for Bodrum Jazz Festivals, we and Ahmet Ertegün's and Mika's house in Bodrum is very important. It's a beautiful architectural building, and two houses together. It's on in the marina of Bodrum. It's a beautiful place to see, and we wanted to do this conversation in the house or in the garden, but we couldn't do it this year. But whenever it's possible, we really want to be in that house together, hopefully next year.
So I think that would be wonderful. Well, as probably many people know, Ahmet and Neswi's father was an ambassador. And I think he was first Switzerland, and then in France, and then in England. And so what happened was at that time, this is in the early 1930s, I think, Ahmet, well, especially Neswi, because he was older, going to hear jazz. A wonderful story that Ahmet told me was that Neswi took him in London to see Duke Ellington for the first time, and they were just overwhelmed. I mean, the sound of this live orchestra. So they were major music lovers. And then when their father was appointed ambassador to Washington, to the United States in 1934, they were thrilled beyond words that they were going to be coming to the home of jazz. And so Neswi continued his studies at the Sorbonne, and Ahmed, who was, I think, 14 or 15 years old, of course, went to Washington with his parents. And as soon as he got there, he began going to concerts or whatever, or clubs to music, and also to buy records because they collected, at that time it was 78. So ultimately, then Nesui joined them and the family, and Ahmet and Nesui really were instrumental in desegregating Washington. It's hard for people to, I think, even believe this, but Washington, D.C., the capital of the United States, at that time in the 1930s was segregated. Black people couldn't live in certain areas. They had to sit in areas of movie theaters. It was quite shocking. Nestle, they couldn't believe that it's happening in the capital city of the United States. But they loved the music and the musicians, and ultimately they began inviting musicians, both white and black musicians, to come for Sunday lunch at the embassy, and then everybody would just start playing music afterwards. So there's a wonderful documentary that was done by a lovely Turkish filmmaker that whole period.
Yeah.
This is when Ahmet and Nesui, before they ever became active in the music business, they were music fans. And it's a lovely documentary about that whole period.
Yeah.
So then Ahmet and Nesui's father passed away in 1944, and they did not go back to Turkey with their mother and sister, but they stayed in the United States. Ahmet was finishing his university studies, and then he went to New York. And Nesui went to California, went to Los Angeles, where, interestingly, he became the first person to teach a class in jazz at UCLA. So he got involved in producing for different record companies in California. Ahmet moved to New York and then went into partnership with a man called Herb Abramson in 1947, and they started Atlantic Records. And this was with very little money, and they were able to record some artists. They had a hit, their first hit was in 1949, called Drinkin' Wine Spodioti. That was their first hit record. And they continued to work with artists, is now called R&B, rhythm and blues. And interestingly, Jerry Wexler, who both Herb and Amit knew as another record collector and fan and music lover, Jerry was a journalist at Billboard, and so the records that we now call rhythm and blues, R&B charts, the title of the charts was race records, which was very pejorative. And so Jerry suggested to the editors at Billboard that they change it, and then you got rhythm and blues. And then at a certain point, Herb Abramson had to go into the army and be posted in Germany. So he had to leave the company. I mean, he was still an owner. And then they invited Jerry to come in. This was, I think, 1953, to become a partner. So Jerry became a partner with Ahmet. Herb went to Germany, and Herb's wife, Miriam, was handling most of the activity that had to do with the publishing company that they had, and also sort of being the office manager. So at that time, of course, Ahmet had already signed Ray Charles. They had Ruth Brown. They were getting Joe Turner. Ultimately, then they had the group that became the Drifters. So they were recording Black artists, and their customers, the people that were buying the records, initially were African Americans. But then Jerry explained something to me that was very interesting, that with the invention of the transistor radio, white kids could listen to music on their own without having to be in the house with mom and dad listening to whatever they were listening to. They could listen to whatever they wanted. And there were several radio stations in the United States that had African American DJs, disc jockeys, who were playing the rhythm and blues music. And white kids with their little transistor radios were able to tune into these stations, and they started hearing this music that was exciting and interesting, and therefore you sort of have the birth of rock and roll, actually,
Oh.
because of this. So in some cases with Atlantic, early on, an Atlantic artist would record a song, and then it would become a rhythm and blues hit, but then a white artist would record it and have another hit. So this thing went on for a while. Then Herb Abramson came back from Germany, having fulfilled his military service, and they created ATCO, ATCO Records, which he was so that he would have sort of his own label within Atlantic. And the first artist that was a hit on ATCO was Bobby Darin. And so he was really their first white artist. Ahmet and Jerry, well, they invited Nesui to come back to New York and also become a partner in Atlantic. And that was in, I think, 1955. He was really responsible for creating their jazz division. And so Herbie Mann, John Coltrane, Charlie Mingus, the Modern Jazz Quartet. Actually, there's an incredible story that Nesui told. Charlie Mingus was recording at their studio. They had an office, but that was where the studio, they didn't have a separate studio at that time. It was very rudimental. Anyway, they were recording and it was late. A countess who was dating the musician who had a Rolls Royce, and when they finished the session, they went down to get into the car and it didn't start. And so all these jazz musicians that were in the band had to push the Rolls Royce down the street to get it started. I don't know if you want to keep that story, but anyway, it was very amusing. So Nesui was the one who really supervised and created and grew the jazz label. Well, he also supervised the transition over to albums because in the beginning they were all singles. They were all 45s. There was no such thing as an album. Then at a certain point, Herb Abramson left the company, and his ex-wife then stayed on, Miriam, as one of the partners. Then this is the period also where you have them working with other producers, people like Lieber and Stoller, who brought in the coasters and who were recording the drifters. Phil Spector, they hired him. There was another producer called Bert Burns, who they also started a subsidiary label with him called Bang Records. Now, he was a very interesting character and brought in Van Morrison, for example, from Ireland and recorded. So they had a lot of things going on. They worked with a lot of different producers and had this incredible variety of artists. In 1969, they decided to sell the company, and it was bought by a company called Warner Seven Arts. And the head of that company was a man called Elliot Hyman. So he was the owner of Warner Brothers Films. So he acquired Atlantic, but they all had contracts. In other words, they all stayed on running Atlantic, and they had, what can I say, just an incredible explosion of success. Jerry had signed Aretha Franklin and was producing her. Ahmet was very much involved in bringing in the English acts like Cream, and the jazz section was doing very well and then of course you had soul with Aretha and so many other artists, and they also were working with Stax Records in Memphis, and they were distributing Stax. At the same time, this whole thing was going on with rock and roll acts. So the company really, there were so many different types of artists then. Then you get into artists like Crosby, Stills and Nash and Young, which was, you're talking about the super groups then. Then Atlantic became the distributor of Rolling Stones records. So they were working with the Stones. Then they also distributed Asylum Records. We had been contacted about the Beach Boys being on this live album. And so I was invited to a big party that Alice Cooper, the art he had at the Coconut Grove in Los Angeles, and Ahmet was at that party. So I was introduced to Ahmet, and I said, I'm with the Beach Boys, and there's you were interested in having them on this live album that you recorded. And so he said, well, it's Jerry Wexler. And I got a call from Atlantic Records office in Los Angeles. And would I go have a meeting with him to talk about the Beach Boys being on this live album with the Allman Brothers? Anyway, I went, we had the meeting, and he was very nice and sort of asked me a lot about myself and about where did I go to college. Anyway, it was very nice. And then the next time I heard from him, he invited me to the Coconut Grove, same place that Alice Cooper had the party, because Aretha was performing there. And so I went and saw Aretha at the Coconut Grove. And then he would come to California very often to record, and one thing led to another. And we were married in 1973. A couple of months later, Atlantic had its 25th anniversary, and they took everyone to Paris for 3 days to celebrate. So it was quite an amazing giant party with all the people who worked at Atlantic. I think what's interesting about that period in the 60s, early 70s and everything, that at the same time on the charts, you could have the Four Seasons, you could have the Beach Boys, you could have the Byrds, you could have the Four Tops from Motown. You had this incredible cross section of different kinds of music, some pretty amazing artists.
Big time. It was, one of the biggest times, I guess.
Yeah, it was it's wonderful. But there were two people at Atlantic at that time that I think are interesting to talk about. One of them is Tom Dowd, who was their engineer from the beginning, from when they had their little office and studio all in the same room. And Tom Dowd was a physicist, actually. He actually worked on the Manhattan Project, which was the project that developed the atom bomb. An engineering genius, and he's the one that Atlantic was one of the first companies that recorded in stereo. And the other person was Arif Mardin, who, as you know, was Turkish. His family was diplomats, they were business people, but he was very attracted to music. And even though he went to the London School of Economics, in 1956 in Istanbul, he met Dizzy Gillespie and Quincy Jones, because Quincy at that time had his big orchestra and he was touring Europe. And Quincy actually told me this story, that Arif definitely wanted to study music and work in music. And at that time, Quincy at the Berklee College of Music in Boston had they created a scholarship in Quincy's name at the Berklee School, and Arif was the first person to receive the Quincy Jones scholarship. So that was
I didn't know
really
that.
yeah. Quincy told me that, and yes, that happened. So Arif went to Boston, went to Berkeley, and then ultimately went to New York and was hired by Atlantic. He was Nesui's assistant for a long time. Then he was doing the arrangements, and he worked with Jerry on many projects, Aretha, Dusty Springfield, and then of course Arif went on to produce Bette Midler, the Rascals, Cream. I mean, he went on to produce, and I think the final artist that he worked with was Norah Jones, and she won 9 Grammys that year with Arif's recording. And what's really interesting, and I told you about Tom Dowd and Arif, the other person also who was a producer at Atlantic was Joel Dorn. So he produced Roberta Flack and many artists and a lot of the jazz artists. Well, what's really wonderful is that the children of Arif, Joel Dorn, and Tom Dowd have put together a podcast off the record and on the charts, and people can listen to it on Apple, whatever podcast they use, and it's incredible. So it's Arif's son Joe, Joel Dorn's son, whose name is Adam, and Dana Dowd, who is Tom Dowd's daughter. And what's really wonderful is they're talking to people who worked with their fathers, who were involved with their fathers. And the first person that they interviewed actually was my stepson, Jerry's son, Paul. And so that's really nice. And then I think the second or the third one with Mike Stoller, who was part of the Lieber and Stoller songwriting and production team. And it's really nice that they're doing something in honor of their fathers.
Yeah.
And I think that that's really lovely. In addition to the documentary that Umram, years of the Erteguns in Washington, there are so many wonderful documentaries about Atlantic or the artists who were on Atlantic. I mean, there's one documentary called The Last Sultan. The documentary is called The House That Ahmet Built.
Mhm.
And so that's very much about Ahmet, of course. Then there is a series, I think it's 4 episodes on Stax Records and all those artists that were distributed by Atlantic. So you have Sam and Dave and Booker T and the MGs and that whole Memphis sound. There's a lot out there. It's really wonderful that these documentaries are getting made about these people and the music. And so this is all very, very exciting.
Yeah.
These things are going on, and people can learn more about the artists and the music. And frankly, those extremely exciting times
Sure.
for artists in all the different genres.
Could you tell me about how your experience? I know that you have been in Ahmet's house, or you have some memories with Nasui.
Right.
Just I want to hear about them. It's very important for us to know them in person.
Right.
They have done what they have done, we know. But how was your impression with them as
I certainly knew who all of them were because working in the music business and everything. And then when I married Jerry and moved to New York, we were having dinners in each other's houses and everything. Of course, Ahmet was married to Mika, who was Romanian and who was a really well-respected and very successful interior designer.
yeah.
And so she and her partner, Chessie Rayner, had a company called Mac 2, and they were decorating the houses of very formidable people in New York. And of course, their houses were wonderful. They put 2 townhouses together in on the Upper East Side, and they had a house in Southampton, and then they had an apartment in London, and then they had the Bodrum house that, of course, Mika designed and decorated. When I married Jerry, Nesui had just married Selma, who was his 4th wife. And Selma and I were the same age. We had some very funny things happen. One night, Jerry and I were invited over to Nesui and Selma's apartment for dinner. And there were a number of other people there, some London and Paris, and Sonia Rykiel, for example, the designer. And so Selma and I were sitting together on the sofa, and she turned to me and she said, Renee, we're the only 2 people here who do not remember World War II. Mika was incredibly glamorous, wonderful, fabulous, chic lady with incredible taste.
Rest in peace, many of them. Yeah.
Yeah. So sadly, Mika died. I believe it was about 2 years ago. And I just discovered, which was really very sad. I mean, I was really surprised. Selma passed away. I'm sorry, Ahmet and Mika had no children. And Nesui and Selma had a son and a daughter.
And we just want to say hello to them also. And their father was very important.
Yes.
I hope they
So
will come. We will meet again in Bodrum Jazz Festival. Maybe we take this opportunity to invite them to Turkey.
I think that would be wonderful, but I also think since Joe Arif's son, and since they're doing this wonderful podcast, I think it might be something for you to think about to do some sort of a tribute to Arif, Joe and his sister. It'd be wonderful if they could be invited and come
Yeah. We met in New York, but then you recently moved back to
to Greece.
Athens, to Greece.
Right,
So,
right.
how is it?
I've been here for a year. I did live in Greece for quite a long time, from about 1990 till 2013. Um, and what's happening now with me is I'm involved in a number of interesting projects. Also, as you know, there are a number of Greek jazz musicians in addition to Dimitri, Petros Klampanis, for example, a wonderful pianist called Tanya Yanuli, and they are really becoming internationally recognized performers. And there's a lot going on here in terms of jazz. I think that there can be more exchanges with people. And yes, Greece and Turkey are neighbors. We eat the same food.
Definitely.
We may call it something a little bit different, but it's basically the same ingredients and everything.
Mhm.
And I think that what you're doing with the Bodrum and Ankara festivals are very important because they're the right bridge. And I think that people sharing music, people sharing food. I think this is the way that good relations develop.
I was very happy when you took me in New York to listen Petros
To see
Klampani,
Richard.
to
Yeah,
see Richard also. Yeah,
we saw Richard twice. We went to see him in the club first,
yeah,
and then we went to that concert in New Jersey.
New Jersey.
And you
Yeah,
brought your son and your daughter-in-law.
yeah, and I still really want to bring Richard Barata group to Turkey somehow, someday. I'm going
It
to
will
make it.
happen. I mean, for
Yeah,
a lot of different companies and people and everything, this has really um, thrown a lot of people's plans up in the air.
yeah. But I'm
So,
very, very happy to have met you, and my network is broadening through you. And always, if I have something to ask, first I reach to you. So thank you very much.
well, I'm sorry I can't be there this year. I want to wish you a wonderful festival. I want to wish everybody that's attending to have a marvelous time. Enjoy the music, have fun, and
Musical event, hopefully, in the beautiful Ertegün house here in Bodrum.
that would really be wonderful if that can
Yeah,
happen.
we would really love to do something in their name.
I totally agree.
And thank you for
Good.
this lovely video chat.